On Being a Pagan. Alain de Benoist. Translated by John Graham, edited by Greg Johnson. 2004. Originally published in French under the title Comment peut-on, étre, paien? Under the pen name Albin Michel, 1981. Narrated by Skeptical Waves. Chapter 24, The Coincidence of Opposites and the Problem of Evil. Pagan thought does not overlook any antinomy but exceeds them all within a Unitarian conception of the world and the deity. The birth of opposites and the divine unity comes at the end of dualism. Here again paganism conforms to the general rules of life, insofar as life's very nature and criterion is to combine opposites. The world is not a whole divided into clearly demarcated compartments, says Renan, but a painting whose colors all vary by intangibly subtle degrees. To irreducibly contrast opposites amounts, as Nietzsche clearly saw, to opposing life. The opposite approach, which leads on the epistemological plane to anti-reductionism, is developed around three fundamental axes. These are, first, the principle of the union of opposites and the definition of God as that union; second, the unfolding of God within this world and the subsequent unfolding of the contradiction of the opposites whose necessary confrontation is recognized as one of the manifestations of the deity; and finally the structuring of the human mind on the same model. God, like the unity of opposites, writes Sigrid Hunk, also determines the structure of the human mind. Formed by the divine model, it is given structure by the coincidentia oppositrum, the method of holistic knowing and thinking, for, although reason, by dividing and combining, analyzes the all-encompassing thought of the intellect, as the world does for the infinity of God, it does not escape the need to find unity and a vision of the whole. The great modern theoretician of the coincidence of opposites is Nicholas of Cusa, 1401–1464, who anticipated certain works of Copernicus and was claimed by Giordano Bruno as his main inspiration. The coincidence of opposites, he said, is still the least imperfect definition we may give of God. God is the non-other, de non-aliud. He is above all the opposites, and he combines them together in him. He is harmony, concordantia. For Scotus Origina, God encompasses even what we view as being opposite to him and combines the similar and dissimilar, being himself the resemblance of the similar, the non-resemblance of the dissimilar, the antagonism of antagonistic elements, and the opposition of the opposites. We find here the harmony extolled by the Greeks, which was based on alternation, excelling, and an antagonistic complementarity. The opposites find accord, and a beautiful harmony is born from what differs. Everything is born of struggle. And it is not by chance that Dionysius rules over the oracle at Delphi once a year while Apollo is away in the land of the Hyperboreans. One of the principles of Shivate philosophy incorporated into Aryan Hinduism similarly defines the divine as that in which the opposites coexist. This theme also responds to the alchemical principle of solvet coagula, which combines separation and dissolution on the one hand, and reunion and coagulation on the other, just as myth, at its birth, frees contradictory mythemes that are destined, when all is said and done, to be reabsorbed within a rediscovered unity. During the modern era, it is probably Carl G. Jung who has analyzed with the most finesse how alchemy strives to combine opposing factors within the same conjunction. Citing Nicholas of Cusa, Jung himself writes that the real opposites are not of incommensurable magnitudes, otherwise they could not combine. Despite all their opposition, they always display a tendency to do this. The phrase coincidentia oppositorum here echoes the testimonies collected by depth psychology and likewise those of depth sociology, and even, in microphysics, the propositions of Stefan Lupasco on the balancing structures of three matters and the logic of contradictory elements. By opposing paths, we follow on our palms the lines of force of the same game. In you alone, Lord, are they found again. As a unity of opposites, God necessarily sits beyond good and evil. This is a point of view that is perfectly excluded, of course, by Judeo-Christian monotheism. If God is all-powerful and infinitely good, why does he tolerate evil and how is evil possible? Catholic theology, when it is not hiding before the mystery, generally answers this question by appealing to the notion of free will and by asserting that man must deserve his salvation, which in fact only evades the issue. The responsible party, in any case, could not be anyone but man. Evil in fact either comes from God or from man. Now as God is absolute perfection, nothing imperfect or evil could come from him. Following the death of Abel, when Cain is being questioned by Yahweh on the fate of his brother, Cain vainly tries to push the fault back on his interrogator. Cain says, "It is I who killed him, but it is you who created the evil tendency within me." Everything evil that occurs, in the Judeo-Christian creation story, occurs because of human failings. The original sin caused man's transition from a naturally good state to a fallen state. The designs in man's heart are evil from infancy has shown how the moralization of God implies the guilt of the creature to explain the birth of evil. The embodiment of absolute good by a unique God leaves no other way out. Man must be responsible. This is what Pascal said: we must be born guilty, if not God must be unjust. And, as I said earlier, it is precisely insofar as the guilt of the creature excuses the Creator, whom it exculpates, that one can ask if, in fact, it does not serve to mask the fault of the Creator. The guilt of the creature in turn implies the economy of salvation and redemption. In Judeo-Christianity, evil comes from sin, as the excess of its own cause. The misfortune coming from evil is then taken as a signal calling for its expiation, in order for adversity to disappear in turn. The result, as we have seen, is the moralization of history. If the people of Israel experienced exile, it was because of their sins. If history produced a Syrian assault on Palestine, it was a sign of Yahweh's vengeance against the religious infidelity of Israel. The infidelity of a people cannot entail the infidelity of God. God is not a man who regrets, says the Torah. All the misfortunes of ancient Israel, with the exception perhaps of certain persecutions, such as those of the Hasmonean era, are thereby interpreted as so many negative theophanies, which is, in short, logical when history is conceived as the epiphany of God. Catastrophes are necessarily punishments. If all is going badly, it is because Yahweh is obliged to act ruthlessly. And why is he acting so harshly? Because all of us who have been engendered, are bathed in our sins, and are full of injustice, and our sins are heavy, Ezra 9:6-7. Accordingly, as Renan observed in the preface to his Ecclesiastes, the messianic perspective is necessarily absolute in this system, because it compensates for and thereby justifies the presence of evil. The day of Yahweh, says Renan, is the focal point of the unhappy consciousness of Israel. God is one, and he is infinitely good. He is just, infinitely just. A day will come when Yahweh establishes his kingdom, and the virtues of the just will be recognized. In Christianity, it is thanks to the mediation of Jesus, God turned man, that redemption is possible. If history were not moralized, it would become morally incomprehensible. The eternal question still remains. Why do the wicked prosper? Jeremiah 12:1. Why does virtue sometimes appear to be punished and vice sometimes rewarded? This question forms the framework of the book of Job. Temptation is what emerges from this question. Job vainly protests against the excess of adversity that strikes him. It is the impossibility of understanding his guilt that forms the foundation of his lamentations. Man can never be right and God wrong, even when appearances are in man's favor. Job 9:2. Job knows he is not in the wrong and proclaims his innocence, but at the same time declares that Jehovah cannot deceive himself. Although creator of all, Yahweh cannot accept being attributed with the paternity of evil. Job performs an act of submission, regrets his earlier claims of innocence, takes back his words, and repents. Only then does Yahweh restore him to his previous condition. The lesson of the story is that man should renounce any attempts to grasp the profound reasons behind the mystery. Logic should not inspire him with any doubt, because this logic is a minor thing in comparison to Yahweh's logic. The suffering of the just and the triumph of the wicked are only temporary. A time of retribution must surely come when each receives his just deserts. By refusing to condemn God's silence, whose demonic dimension he has seen, though Renan labeled the book of Job a sublime blasphemy, Job is the declared exemplary figure as opposed to Cain. He accepts his fate without understanding, whereas Cain, who was equally non-comprehending, revolted against Yahweh's apparent injustice. A characteristic apology for servitude and yet another condemnation of human pride. Christianity has taken up the same theme by transfiguring it. This transfiguration is not only motivated by the Christian theology of original sin, according to which all humans born in this world must pay for the sin of Adam, although their sole crime is to have been born. It is also based on the belief that Jesus, innocent by nature, did not hesitate to incarnate and suffer for the sins of the world, which he obviously did not commit, so that, as Joseph de Maistre writes, Christianity rests entirely on this dogma, of innocence paying for the guilty. The situation is obviously completely different in pre-Christian European antiquity. The God here is not a completely other. He is a partner, whom man has the right to expect to keep his commitments. In any case, his failings do not necessarily echo man's imperfection or guilt. In paganism, man had confidence in his gods, but this confidence could be shaken. Among the Greeks as well as the Germans, a god who did not fulfill the protector role that was rightfully expected of him could be repudiated. A conception that was extended into the political domain as follows: the sovereign should be respected, but if he does not behave as expected of a sovereign, he can be legitimately overthrown. With regard to the gods honored by the ancient Icelanders, Sigurður Nordal writes, one debated and argued with them if they had failed in some way. Justice was demanded of them as if they were like other men, in the form of gifts and compensations. One can even read these proud words in a saga, if Thor does not protect me anymore, then I will part from him and choose another protector. And perhaps I won't choose any. Heraclitus also repeated the question posed by Jeremiah, but came up with a different answer. Let's hear what Nietzsche has to say about it. Do guilt, injustice, contradiction, and suffering exist in this world? They do, proclaims Heraclitus, but only for the limited human mind which sees things apart but not connected, not for the all-seeing God. For him all contradictions run into harmony, invisible to the common human eye, yet understandable to one who, like Heraclitus, is related to the contemplative God. In Christian theology, no evil exists naturally. Evil is neither a being nor a substance. Nor is it a non-created principle co-eternal with God, as the Manichaeans believed. Evil is only the destruction of being. It comes exclusively from man and the poor application of his freedom. Subsequently, evil is everything that works in opposition to the finalist perspective of creation, everything that opposes the direction of history intended by Yahweh. In Hebraic then Christian thought the cause of evil is to be found in human history. It is a created freedom that is the cause of evil and responsible for its existence. In other words, man makes a deficient use of his freedom when he utilizes it differently from the way desired by Yahweh. I offer you life or death, a blessing or a curse. So choose life, so that you and your descendants shall live, loving Yahweh your God, hearing his voice, bonding to him, Deuteronomy 30:19-20. But then what value is a freedom that one should use in only one way? More importantly, what is the value of a freedom that, if used, produces evil? Furthermore, it is not even by using his freedom that man can ensure his salvation. Salvation is a gift from God, only God is the cause of salvation. Man can only make a negative choice, he is only free to go astray. The ontological action of man is to choose death. In addition, if it is man's poor use of his freedom that is the cause of evil, then the first cause of evil clearly resides in God for granting man such freedom. From whichever angle it is approached, the problem remains unintelligible. In the final analysis, the Babylonian myth concerning the existence of evil is much more convincing. It blames man's ability to commit evil acts on the fact that, at the time of his creation, the gods blended the blood of an evil god who had been executed with the matter from which the first men were created. In Judeo-Christianity, and particularly in Christianity, it is uniquely man to whom responsibility for evil is attributed. Man is the guilty party. The abject, to speak like Julia Kristeva, is radically internalized. And this is taken to the point of neurosis. Addressing God, St. Augustine says, "What is good in me is by your work and your grace, what is evil in me is by my fault and your judgment." In paganism there is no objective definition of evil. Evil is not inscribed within matter as is claimed by, among others, the Neoplatonists, nor is it rooted in human nature, as in the Pauline conception. Evil does not pose a particular problem because it is not viewed as an absolute value. It does not spring from being, but from beings. It varies according to the values and ethical rules that individuals and peoples give themselves. More precisely, from the perspective I am taking, evil is what prevents us from being equal to the idea we have of ourselves, what makes us fall short rather than exceeding our limitations and is ultimately degrading. What is good? Nietzsche asks. All that heightens the feeling of power, the will to power, power itself in man. What is bad? All that proceeds from weakness. What is happiness? The feeling that power increases, that a resistance is overcome. Taking human diversity into consideration, individual as well as collective, how could evil be the same thing for everyone? There are no absolutes, there are only relative truths from given times and places. This by no means implies that all is permitted. As Husserl shows, an essence grasped in appearances is not contradicted from one person to the next within the same culture, which is the basis of intersubjectivity. Nor does it mean that ethics should be utilitarian, but simply that it is inevitably connected to a conception of the world that carries and roots it within a collective substratum. Evil is not a matter of sin or a priori guilt. Its determination is dependent on what we belong to and on the choices we make. Ethics is a fundamental given in paganism, but there is no universal moralization. This amounts to saying that there are no values in the world other than those resulting from our initiatives and interpretations. There are no moral phenomena, there are only moral interpretations of phenomena. Just as life and death transform each other incessantly and are necessary to each other, the same holds true for good and evil, and only dimwits will find this an excuse to believe that what is good is no better than what is bad, or that both are indifferent in worth. Good and evil are one and a same thing, said Heraclitus, and yet they are not equivalent. Good and evil are a same thing, but they are not the same thing. They are a same thing because they arise from the same source. One is born from the other, asserts Jacob Behem. What we call evil is only another aspect of good, writes Gouda. Good may become evil and vice versa, Just as what was cold becomes hot, and heat turns cool, the moisture dries and what is dry becomes wet. There is yet a difference between hot and cold, but one constitutes the becoming of the other. It is because evil exists that there can be good. Every notion in fact requires its opposite. Darkness is the greatest enemy of light, and this is the reason why light is visible, observes Boehme. For if there was no black, white would not appear, if there was no suffering, joy would not appear. Good as well as evil are necessary for man to experience himself and construct himself. This is why, Paracelsus says, God has ordained a limit to good and evil so that neither ascends too high. If evil were to disappear, writes Sigrid Hunk, the good would grow beyond all measure and become worse than evil in its rightful proportions. It would overthrow order and annihilate being. The one cannot exist without the other. This is why there is nothing in nature that is totally good or evil. Paracelsus would even go so far to say that evil could be found in the highest echelon of creation. It existed before the fall of the angels, which only made it manifest. Since the beginning, good and evil have met in heaven, and even God himself has been affected. This is also the reason why agonistic practices forbid one from going to extremes. Goethe and Attila, writes Henry de Montherlant, emanate from the same single source of universal energy. As natural phenomena they are interdependent. The beauty of the universe and its greatness are made as much of what you call evil as it is of what you call good, and Attila would agree with this as much as Goethe. Let's fight Attila, but fight knowing his higher utility. Let's fight him with a profound kindness, and to be honest, fight him while loving him. By presenting good and evil as absolutes, that is, by replacing the real world with a theoretical world, Christianity, like Plato and Socrates, presented itself as an antagonist of the Dionysian vitality that compels the human soul to assert itself as a yea-sayer to life. Now morals are neither the grammar nor the truth of a life, which would be external and subjugated. At best, morality is the description and qualification of life. In paganism, the gods do not represent absolute good. They are both good and evil insofar as they represent sublimated forms of the good and evil that coexist, as antagonists, within life itself. They are simultaneously great within each other. They are what inspired Pericles to exclaim, "Our audacity has carved us a path by force over land and over sea, raising imperishable monuments to itself for good as well as evil." Paganism never stopped tasting what the Bible calls the fruits of the tree of good and evil. It has never ceased to assert the conjunction of opposites, which Judeo-Christian monotheism with horror describes as confusion and chaotic helter-skelter. And the worst confusion concerns absolute good and evil, which lead to their own surpassing. Woe to those who call good evil and evil good. Declares Isaiah 5:20. The non-distinction of absolutes, the human claim to establish itself as the founder of values, is what the Bible condemns most fundamentally. It is the affirmation of this neutral zone that Heidegger, himself condemned by Levinas, makes one of the characteristics of being. I see and I know the totality of being in good and evil, and how one gives birth to the other, writes Jacob Boehme. The revelation, if there is one, would be the non-existence of the opposites engendered by dualistic thought, the non-existence of the irreducible opposites born of the affirmation of the completely other. This is what Europe has been directly or indirectly repeating ceaselessly for millennia. This is what it has been compelled to constantly cast into the faceless face of Yahweh.